Ciao. Ciao.
Ciao.
Okay, we got people jumping in.
That's good, I guess.
Hi. Zdravo.
How are you doing?
Good. My microphone broke down.
Nah, terrible news.
Yeah. It's even worse because people tell me they still hear me fine, so it makes me think that I just wasted money on it.
Yeah, it's funny. Okay, so we're still waiting on Ben and others. If you want, I have a small exercise I prepared. So here's a link to Miro, and it has two boards with just two questions. Like one is about like how you see yourself, how familiar are you with systems and complexity, and the second is about the way you work. So you can just take stickers from the sidebar. If you don't see stickers, there are these two like arrows to reveal more items. So you can just like find stickers there, or you can copy paste these below that I already added. So yeah, I think Ben is joining.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I had
problem.
a little bit of a technical problem.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. We were just getting together.
Brilliant.
So I share this short little exercise. Let me reshare the link.
Off here as well.
Oh, you're invisible.
Yeah, my camera's had a hard day like me. It'll warm up in a minute. It's just tired.
No so
right.
yeah. Oh. We were just like getting to know each other, and like I was asking some questions about if everyone is familiar, how everyone is familiar with systems and complexity theory. And the second question is like the way your organization is actually, what is your organization focused on? KPIs and achieving goals, or addressing user feedback, or empowering employees? And there's also the option, I don't know, you can also say, I don't know, just put a sticker under there. So yeah, I guess we can use a few minutes more to see like other people will join.
Nice.
Yeah, so I guess while we're waiting the rest of the guys, I can also like thank you for taking the time to do this. And I don't know if everyone else knows, but like Benjamin is quite an expert in this field. But aside from being an expert, he's also a great person. So thanks for doing this, sir.
That's a pleasure. Sorry, I'm trying to tell somebody I'm in the meeting.
No problem.
I'm really looking forward to this. And I should say that it's ironic that I've been back now for since Friday in the UK, having spent like nearly a year and a half in Serbia. In Novi Sad, European capital of culture, of course.
Nice.
I mean, do you have more introduction things?
Yeah, so I also wanted to address an elephant in the room. I had an accident, but I think I'm getting better, so I'll know next week. And I received a lot of well wishes, so thanks for that. I'm an introvert, so I don't always know how to react to this, like well wishes, you know. So and I think the last thing I wanted to mention is a recap. In the past several months, we talked about systems and complexity and organizational design and post-Cartesian paradigm. So we said that at any moment we are either a part of a system or we are interacting with a system. And to make this whole topic more approachable, we were using like system and domain and context interchangeably. And although I realize there are some nuances between like system and context, but I guess another great abstraction of the system is the world. And that's my cue to shut up and hand it over to you, Benjamin. And just one more thing, like any questions that might come up, please post them in the chat and we will go through them at the end of the keynote. So now I will shut up.
No worries. Thank you so much, Novi. And thanks for the opportunity. It'd be nice for me if generally, if it's comfortable and convenient, people could have their video on. I'm not to worry if not, but if it drops much below this 4 friendly faces, including my own, then I will start to worry that I'm talking into the void, kind of thing. And I will try and monitor the chat as well and try and pick up things as I go. But if you want to shout out questions, I'm also happy for that. Hi, Igor's in a taxi. Awesome. Driving? Are you driving or in a taxi?
Driving.
Okay, be safe. I don't want to show my slides now in case you get so distracted. Okay. So I'll put my. Oh, could you share? Could you give me the right to share screen,
Sorry,
Novi?
please. Sorry, I'll do it in a minute.
Thank you. So Novi's asked me to talk about my 5 worlds concept, and I'm going to link that into 5 core practices for organizations generally, but specifically in complexity. And somehow I, perhaps rashly, in writing the blurb to go on the sensemaking-rs meetup, said that I would talk about the importance of sense-making worlds, how they interact, and what are some pathologies around how they interact. This brilliant systems word from Gregory Bateson, schismogenesis. Transduction, another good systems thinking word from Stafford, and how that impacts on information flows and how things could be better. Now I'm going to put that into my notes for this session, just to make sure that I do cover those things, and if I don't, please hold me to account on them. You know what would be brilliant is if everybody who can type at the moment could just say in the chat one thing that interested them about the premise of this session, one thing that brings them into the room, so that I can see a little bit about, you know, what you're interested in, what you're focused on, if that would be okay. And I'm trying to work out. I've done something with Zoom. Oh, there it is. So it hides my controls. So I've only just managed to turn the chat on. Okay. So basically, I'd love to know who I'm talking to, a little bit about what you're into, and what you want to get into. So Sandesh, thanks. Practices will definitely come up. And by the way, I just learned today that this is. Does anybody know what this map is on the left-hand side?
Yeah, it's a cool thing. Yeah. Oh, I think we lost you. I can't hear you if you're speaking. I don't know if others can.
Can you can't hear me at all?
Oh, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Do you want to explain what it is, Novi?
It's like an accurate representation of our globe that is expanded in this way, so that all the proportions are correct, right?
Basically, yeah. So the distances and the travel,
and
it was created by it's called the Dymaxion map, Dymaxion, and it was created by Buckminster Fuller and a Japanese-American cartographer in 1943. And some people say it's one of the reasons why the Nazis were defeated in the Second World War, and the Japanese also, because it made very evident that flying over the polar ice cap, over the polar route, was the quickest route from America to the rest of the world. And it actually shows a way, yeah, so very much about sense making, and very much about different worlds, and about how seeing things in a different way creates different worlds. Igor, do you have your hand up to talk? I can see a little hand on the screen. Just don't worry if not, but if you want to say something.
Sorry, I might have probably touched it by
Yeah,
accident.
don't touch anything more. Carry on driving. That's fine. That's fine. Great. All right. So that will be a lead in. So I'm Benjamin Taylor. Connect to me on all the social media under the very unprofessional name Antler Boy. I'll give a small prize of recognition to anybody who can work out why Antler Boy is my social media name. And I'm involved in lots of things. I run RedQuadrant, a networked consultancy in the UK, mostly doing public service transformation. I run Social Enterprise, the Public Service Transformation Academy. I curate a website for all things systems complexity and cybernetics at Systems Community of Inquiry, syscoi.com. I blog, led by LinkedIn posts that I do Monday and Wednesday morning, and I'm writing, and I'm part of groups and all kinds of things like that. And I've been kind of passionate and obsessed by systems complexity and cybernetics, which I see, and this could be an interesting debate. The one person who violently disagrees with me on this is Dave Snowden. Complexity, cybernetics, and systems thinking as one extended field with common roots and common themes and common focus and so on. It's great when Dave Snowden disagrees with me, because
it's an achievement.
it's a great achievement. It's really difficult to get him to do that. I met Novi through that social media stuff, in a sense, I guess, Novi. And Novi is a participant in the RedQuadrant Way toolshed at the moment, which is a joint small cohort-based learning opportunity, which is my advert. If anybody's interested, that's a thing that I do that's available. So I won't be advertising anymore after this, but just so you all know. So I'm going to talk about 5 worlds and about sense-making worlds. And by the way, Novi, I'll send you a PDF of these slides afterwards so that everybody can have access. And I think this is going to be, oh, are you recording? You wanted to record, didn't you?
Yeah, it's recording. Yeah,
it's recording. Okay,
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Fine. I didn't see the thing. So this is a Japanese manga from, I think, the 18th century, I think, or something like that, by Hokusai. And this is the very famous old story that probably everybody in this space has heard, which unfortunately is ableist in its metaphor. But nevertheless, I'm sticking with it because it's a classic and it's useful. This story says that 9 blind men, I think it is, 2, 4, 6, 8, no, this is 11, I think. Anyway, a group of blind men discover an elephant, and they're trying to understand what it is that they've encountered. And there are various versions of the story, but, you know, the person down here says that an elephant is sharp and pointy and dangerous, like a spear. The person here says an elephant is solid and heavy and can't be moved however much you push. And the person here says an elephant is very, at the back end, says an elephant is like snakes or ropes, and actually it smells pretty bad. This is used in all kinds of different ways in, you know, systems thinking, in organizational development, in learning organization stuff, and so on. The big message that I take from it is that each of these experiences are real and represent a context, and that this is a great metaphor for the different sense-making contexts that people experience in organization. And if you're able to get this kind of a perspective on the whole thing and see that people are in these worlds, the leap which most people make in kind of teaching this is, if only you can get everybody to see the whole elephant. There's a version of this story where everybody's got a little candle and they're in a darkened barn and they're just seeing their bit of the elephant. And if they just bring their candles together and unite the light, they can all see the whole thing. or if we can get this meta perspective and we can see where they all are. Now, I think that's misguided and that's wrong and that's dangerous for two reasons, which are very closely related and related to this sense-making worlds. One reason is that our perspective is just a perspective as well. So seeing the elephant from where we can see it in the manga is just another way of looking at it, and it's no realer or it's not superior, except in a specific context to the perspective of any person just in one part of the elephant. The other side of that is that their experience of the world is conditioned by what their part of the elephant is like. So, you know, it's really important to understand that if you're communicating with somebody at the sharp, pointy end of the elephant in an organization, in a system, in a context, that their experience of the world is sharp, pointy, dangerous things. So they're likely to experience your well-meaning input as potentially another sharp, pointy, dangerous thing. If you're dealing with somebody at the end of the elephant where pretty much what the universe is sending them is elephant dung, then whatever your input is likely to be considered as some species of elephant dung. So these different sense-making worlds are incredibly real. They condition the way in which the people in the different worlds need to make sense, need to survive, need to thrive, need to act, and work on things. And just this afternoon, I read a blog piece about somebody who believes that I'll find the link as I'm talking. Literally, somebody said, I was taken in by the mindfulness idea, and I was brain damaged by meditation. And her point was that she was very good at meditating, and obviously this is one perspective, and I don't know her context or anything other than what I found in this one blog piece, but that she was deeply brain damaged by meditation because it stripped away concepts, it stripped away, she got deeply into qualia, just perceiving everything, and guilty when she wasn't perceiving everything, and finding it hard, a deliberate effort to bring back in concepts, to see things in 3 dimensions as opposed to 2 dimensions, and various kind of things like that. And what I really got from that is that it's quite easy. There's been a whole huge debate about stage theory and adult development, kicked off by Nora Bateson, saying that all stage theories are bullshit and colonial as all get out. I think was her quote. Because however much stage theories, those ideas that people can go through different levels of ability to deal with and process complexity. So the concept is that Piaget originally came up with an idea of stage theory for children's development, that we go through different stages of development in our childhood, object permanence, understanding that other people have an objective reality as well as us, that we go through these recognizable, identifiable phases or stages that we progress through until we become a kind of adult in the world, able to understand that other people have emotions, that the world is real around us, and those kind of things. Loads of thinkers have developed that into adulthood, and said that every 7 to 14 years, if you're lucky, on average, you might go through a transition. And the simple transitions are things like moving from bam, 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 I want everything, give me what I want, as a very early stage of development, to being a diplomat, understanding that you have to fit in with other people and being very, very good at fitting in with other people, to then becoming an expert and becoming really, really good at one subject, and that getting you far in the world, to then realizing that expertise in one subject doesn't actually cut it and doesn't solve all your problems. So then you might become an achiever. I think I'm using Torbert's list of different stages here. So an achiever is somebody who recognizes the limits of their expertise, is strategic, brings in other expertise, works with other people. And then there are other levels beyond that. And each of those levels is better capable of processing, you know, information and social and emotional and ethical and even spiritual complexity. So there's this idea that we can progress in life, and you know, very often the claim that something like mindfulness is good is based on a claim that it gets you to a deeper level of truth, a better way of seeing. And so much of what we talk about in complexity has implied in it, we know something that other people don't know. We have a superior way of understanding the universe. So reading this piece about somebody who feels genuinely brain damaged by meditation made me realize, and I've always said this, but it's hard to really feel it, that even if complexity understanding or enlightenment or, you know, being a regular meditator can in many ways be considered a superior, a more effective, a more wide-ranging, a more capable way of understanding the world of sense making, it's only true given the right context. So, you know, if you are a monk meditating in a monastery, and you strip away all your concepts and all your framing of the external world, and you just get to pure understanding, and you empty your brain, and you believe that that is achievement, and that that is the reality, and that's the truth of the world, then that's great. But if you're somebody out there trying to make a living, trying to deal with ego depletion in the everyday world, trying to deal with your own hang-ups, trying to navigate through a complex urban landscape, for example, then having ready-to-hand concepts, a strong story of the self, easy 3D perception is actually bloody important. So we often talk in adult development, in integral theory, in those stage theories, about transcend and include. So this is a bit of a get-out. So, you know, even though we're really sophisticated complexity thinkers, we're high levels of adult development, we also still keep all of the learning that we had in the earlier stages. And that's only partly true, because once you see a different way of seeing the world, if it clicks in, you can't just switch back to the old way of seeing the world. I'm getting into quite some complexity here, so I hope that's okay. I hope that's useful. And the 2D, 3D thing, she's just perceiving the qualia of the world, colors, lights, surfaces, those kind of things, and that takes us back to Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map, doesn't it? So to get back to the elephant, the point is here that each person has their way of understanding their part of the elephant, and that's important to them because they've developed it as a way to understand and thrive. And sometimes showing them the whole of the elephant would, there's a great part in Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide series called the total perspectivity vortex, where people get plugged into a machine that actually gives them a complete sense of perspective. So it shows them exactly how big the universe is and how insignificant they are, and it drives most people completely insane. So there's risks. And there's a fantastic quote here from Marshall McLuhan. He says, every extension is an amputation. Every new way of seeing it cuts off other ways of seeing. Every new way of thinking about things cuts off other things. Every new media undermines and changes the way we understand old media. So with that said, I'll get practical, but I need to make the point that thinking you can just see the whole of the elephants is a bit of a fallacy, because seeing the whole of the elephant is just another way of seeing, even if it's accurate about what's going on in all the different parts of the elephant. And very often it isn't necessarily. So I stole this cartoon from Professor Gerald Midgley, a brilliant systems thinker, which is based on the same kind of concept. But the idea here is that obviously they're building the picture of the elephant when actually they are dealing with you know, a pointy thing and a brick wall and a rope and so on. So that's the punchline to that whole section. So my 5 worlds model started with 4. And I'll explain how that changes as I go through. I started with the idea that I work in service organisations and primarily public services, and it becomes quite evident then that we make sense in different ways in these different intellect worlds, all of which are vital to organisation and which apply much more widely, as I'll say, I hope, when I come on to the 5 worlds model. But in customer world, we're making sense in our own way. We're trying to achieve our own purposes in our own lives. Every now and again, we have a purpose in our life which is thwarted. We can't achieve something. So that generates a need, which means we have to go and place a demand on service world. So I use this language of purpose, something you're trying to achieve, drives a need, which drives a demand on a service. And we go to service world and we say, I need X, right? And service world tries to listen to that, but not always very well. So my analogy here is we have customers coming to our front desk with customer needs, 2 A's, a B, a C, and a D. 5 different customers with different types of needs. So it doesn't matter what need A or B or C or D is. Just think of those as the thing that the customer actually wants to try to achieve. Does that make sense? So how many times have you run your bank or your IT provider or your mobile phone provider with a question that you want to be answered, but isn't quite one of the things that's in their telephony system? So, you get the menu, choose option 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's not quite those. So you wait for 5, which is other, and then you get the menu, which is 1, 2, 3, and it's not quite any of those, but you have to choose one. So you choose the one that's close, but not quite, right? So you got customer needs A, B, C, and D. And what happens is that the service doesn't hear me asking for service A. What it says is, oh, that looks like the service we provide, which is the triangle-shaped service, because a capital A looks like a triangle. So we're going to give those 2 people demanding service A triangle-shaped service. And C and D, they look close enough to our circle-shaped service. So basically, we're gonna now provide 2 triangle services and 2 circle services. And you might ask, what's happened to customer demand B? Well, B doesn't fit any of the services that we happen to provide at the moment, even though the customer is coming for something that our business should be doing. That, we're a bank and the customer's coming with a banking requirement. But because we don't do it, we have this expression in the UK from a comedy series, computer says no, right? So the computer doesn't recognize the input B, so that demand just gets bounced back out into customer world, right? Whereupon that demand goes to our competitor, or gets worse and comes back as a C or a D, or maybe they learn that what they really need to do to get into the service world system is disguise their B-shaped demand as a D, and then we're dealing with a B and we're giving it circle treatment. And that is transduction. So the point is here that every time information crosses a system's boundary, it gets translated from the language of the system that it's coming from into the language of the system it's going into. Okay, so transduction is originally a concept from cellular chemistry, but we're talking about it as an information transduction idea. So the transduction is from A, B, C, D. We end up in service world thinking that we know that we have customers with 2 triangle-shaped needs and 2 circle-shaped needs. Do you see what I mean? And what happens then, because the transduction has been a translation into a completely different language, we start to provide service triangle and service circle, and they don't quite fit the needs of the A's and the C's and the D's, and certainly not if a B has sneaked in. So then we get additional complexity and failure and rework and failure demand happening in service world. And does anybody want to guess how all of this complexity of providing 2 circle services and 2 triangle services to customers A and C, D gets translated into management world? How does that transduction happen across the boundary? What do we report? How does management world get an understanding of what's happening in service world? How will that get reported up into management world. Nobby might have a good.
It gets even simpler.
It does. And do you want to guess what way it gets even simpler?
I'm not sure. Like it can be many ways, many different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So the example I use is performance management. So that gets reported in to management world as we've done 4 successful service deliveries. 4 units of service have been delivered, and of course everything is good, right? And this is how you get that famous example of watermelon projects. Work that's green on the outside but red on the inside. So this is where the all kinds of. So it's very hard for management worlds to know what's happening in service world because it's getting a transduced signal. By the way, that signal is being distorted by linking incentives and rewards to measures. So as soon as which law is that? It's not Conway's law. It's somebody may tell me. There's a law which says that as soon as you place pressure on a measure, as soon as you reward or punish based on a measure, that measure becomes useless for its original purpose for actually understanding the system.
Yes, Sandesh got it. It's a Goodhart's law.
Goodhart's law. Thank you.
Yeah.
And there's some earlier versions of that and so on as usual.
Yeah.
Sandesh has got a great one. Yeah, 95% of calls were resolved in 5 minutes or less. Yeah, that's a great way of compressing that rich information, the warm data of service world, the realities of people's lives, into something that's palatable to management and tells the story that service world wants to tell. And then there's further transduction before you get here into board world or politician world, but you're starting to get the idea by now. So the idea of transduction in the theory of autopoiesis, which is another very linked bit of systems complexity cybernetics theory, is that it's not actually information that's crossing these boundaries between systems. What's happening is there's an excitation generated from this system that creates an excitation in this system, which we then read as a signal. So when we look at the world through our eyes, it's not that parts of the world are coming into our brain, it's that something happening outside in the world is hitting a signal receptor in the back of our eye, which is then triggering us to think that there is something there. And our brain, and it's not that we see the world, it's that we interpret the world. And there's a very, very famous paper by some of the founders of cybernetics, What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain, which was one of the first things to really, in a very mechanistic, a very scientific way, show that we're not just processing pure information that's coming in from the world, we're actually looking out for, we're doing pattern matching, we're looking for specific things, we're filling in gaps. We're always filling in a gap because the optic nerve covers the back of our eye, so we can't see the whole field of vision. So when I move my hand from left to right, I think I can see it the whole way, but my brain is adding that extra detail. So we're always interpreting the world from a framing, from a context, from a perspective. So here finally is the concept of 5 worlds, which is just a reconfiguration of that in a different way. Predictive encoding is a great way of putting it, Serjan. There's more richness in the comments than I can get to, so let's come back to some of that in the chat. And it's really saying that citizen world is connected to service world. So, there's complexity coming in here that we ill understand, but that we're trying to process in service world. Then management needs to be able to manage the complexity of service world. Leadership world needs to manage the complexity of what's beneath it, but also set a vision for the future, reaching out into the world of learning, change in the future, and also set the kind of long-term culture, strategy, goals of the organization. So in theory, we should all be meeting and reaching out to and spending a lot of time in the world of learning, change in the future. But very often we don't. The slightly more complex version of this diagram, which shows some of the tools that we use in our service transformation work, mostly in public services, is this. So, we help people to look at and understand what's happening with purpose, need, and demand actually out there in the world where people live their lives, how that signal is being transduced into what we think of as the demand coming into the organization. And even the way you phrase this is important. We train people in service world, instead of saying that's the demand for a housing benefit form, kind of thing that some of our clients process, to use the customer voice and actually use the language that the customer uses, like, am I entitled to housing benefits, rather than use the thing that we do to process that demand, the triangle shape, try and retain as much of the A demand as you actually can. So, the work we do in that space is demand analysis. It's looking at ways to save and improve, seeing the service world as a fairly simple system. It's service design, it's 3 levels of fix, building in a sort of triple loop learning. This is from Brian Joyner, where you fix a problem, you fix the customer need, you look for the root cause of customer need, and you look for the systemic cause that allowed that root cause to come up. And ultimately, by trying to get back to co-designing solutions across the boundary with the citizen, with the customer themselves. Management world then has to make sense of all of this, because the point is, in citizen world, we're just living our lives. In service world, our philosophy has to be one of pragmatism, of dealing with the complexity of all the stuff that's coming in from here and all the demand that's coming in from leaders needing information and data and analysis and performance management and all of those kind of things. Management world, though, has a different mindset that's intended to be and ostensibly is trying to be about rationality. Because if you're not rational and scientific as a manager, then what the hell are you doing? So this pragmatism of just getting on and doing things down here transduces into the rationality of trying to make sense of the organization, structure it, organize it, make it legible. So this is where James Scott's Seeing Like a State is a fantastic piece of work for anybody interested in complexity, because his point is that any centralizing organization like management or leadership or anybody trying to coordinate, and particularly a state, a government, has to try to make the system it's trying to coordinate legible to it, readable, understandable, processable. If somebody wants to Google seeing like a state and the normal Baum, that's the classic story where they went out to thank you, sorry, Jen. The government of Germany or Bavaria or something wanted to collect tax on forestry, which was a major industry. But the problem is that forests grow all higgledy-piggledy, so it's very hard to assess how much timber is in a natural forest in order to properly tax it. So what they did was they created this concept of the normal Baum, a way of planting in straight rows and squares and so on, and growing trees and thinning out the underbrush. That meant the tax inspectors could just come along and look at the size of the area and the height of the trees, and they could instantly see how much timber was there. But in making that system legible to the centre, to the government, what they did was they reduced the complexity. They took out that rich, natural synergies and connections and so on. And actually, it turns out that the normal Baum growing is less fertile, less productive, more destructive of the ecosystem than that natural, slightly chaotic forest. So that's like the archetypal story of the problem that's going on there, if that makes sense. So we have to be aware that management world, in trying to coordinate and cohere and make sense of in its way a system which is made sense of internally in a different way, has to simplify and legibilize and standardize in this, in the way that this is often conceived of. And so the role of management world, though, is integration, making sure that this is more than the sum of the parts, that it's coherent organization design. Management and leadership world need to ensure there are clarities of boundaries and discretion, who is responsible for what, who has what freedoms to act, and that they shape a culture and hopefully that they generate a shared understanding of organizational purposes and measures. And I hope we're going to have time to get into the 5 practices that we introduced to try to support this, but I'm not very far through. So those of you who know Stafford Beer's viable systems model, if any of you do, might recognize that this is actually the viable systems model in disguise. So this is a thing that I produced with some colleagues, and actually I did a little intro to this talk on LinkedIn this morning, so I'll just drop that in the chat, and that gives references and thanks to the people who I worked on the 5 worlds model with. And the viable systems model, and this is Barry Clemson's explanation of it, makes the point that so basically you've got the environment of the organization. Then you've got a whole bunch of system ones, and system ones are the bits of any functional part of the organization. And these are not standing teams necessarily. These are capabilities that the organization handles, things that the organization does. Any part of the organization that transacts value across the boundary of the organization, sales, production, different production units, different business units, those are called system ones. And they all have to be viable systems in their own right, and they have to be able to deal with the complexity of what the environment is throwing at them. System 2, which is down here, coordination of so these are all system ones. System 2 is the water that the system ones swim in, the thing that creates the common language, the scheduling, the HR systems, the contracts, the finance systems that allow all the system ones to function together. System 3 is management, making the intentional allocation of resources and the bargain with what the system 1 agrees to do in return for the resources. System 4 is looking out into the future, because all of this is looking down into the here and now and to meeting the current customer demands. So system 4 is saying, okay, that's all very well, but in order to survive in the future, our organization needs to take account of the future environment. So that's saying this is how we need to change to exist in the future. And system 3, delivery, and system 4, intelligence, will always come into conflict to some degree, because system 3 is saying we need all the money and all the resources and all the focus and attention down in the here and now, because look what's going on. It's so complex. There's a lot of demand. There's lots to be thought about. And system 4 is going, no. We need all the resources, all the management focus to be looking to the future, because look what's coming down the pipeline at us. Look how the world is changing. Look how much we need to adapt. So you need system 5, which is the overall governance, the core policy, the core identity of the organization, to mediate between system 3 and system 4. And you need a really good system 3 star, a really good way of management understanding what the hell is going on down in the system 1 and system 2. So this is a fantastic model, a core model, I believe, an underlying truth model kind of thing for how to deal with complexity in organization without an S, the concept of organizations. Any long-term viable self-organizing system I believe, will be able to be modeled in terms of a functioning viable system model. Hey, Mario's joined and he's met Stafford Beer. Maybe you can tell us about that at the end, Mario, that's great. In Barry Clemson's thing, he makes the point that this means you have to maintain an active balance across 2 dimensions. And a friend of mine who would be a brilliant guest, Novi, if you could ever get him, Ivo Velichkov, has written a book called Essential Balances that goes into some of these balances really, really deeply. So you've got to maintain the autonomy of the organizational units. Each of these has to be free to do its thing, but you've also got to make it coherent, integrated as a business as a whole. Otherwise, you just got a whole separate bunch of entities and they've got no reason to be together. And you've got to manage stability versus adaptation to changing conditions, a common challenge. If you have too much autonomy, they just explode and separate apart. If you have too much integration, they're just all trying to do the same thing, basically. You haven't really got any separate business units and you will fail. Too much stability means you just become obsolete, but too rapid adaptation is just chaos. So you're trying to manage these organizational balances in the 5 worlds and in the viable system model. So we can map that out. We can say as a whole system, we need to balance adaptation and stability. And in terms of the parts of the system, we need to balance their autonomy with their integration together. And again, these I really believe are fundamental things for complexity. They come from system cybernetics complexity model. Ivana, if you want to, we can talk about convenes later. I'm not. That's a whole other conversation. Another great systems thinker that I drew great insight from is Barry Oshry, who's got an organic systems framework about how human beings work together in organization and the systemic patterns that come up that undermine our ability to work in effective partnership. And a really interesting pattern here, he talks about the difference between systems of dominance, where we're trying to maintain our worldview effectively, where we other anybody who challenges our worldview. We evaluate them, we fear them, we defend against them, we try and control them. And what he calls robust systems, don't get distracted by the word, but that's his label for it, where we're actually managing a dynamic balance of adaptation, stability, autonomy, and integration, where when we get a new worldview, a new change, a new destabilizing factor, we actually study, welcome, value, and utilize it. And we run a culture simulation that simulates this in just a single day, or even in a half a day, that gives people that experience of what it's like to be in. We naturally snap into a dominant system. We naturally snap into systems that pull us out of organizational partnership. I could say more about that, but there's no time. But the possibility of human life, just like in the 5 worlds, the possibility is not to just get stuck in our view of the part of the elephant, but create a whole system that actually functions together. Barry says there are 4 dimensions that you need to balance and you need to have optimizing and working really effectively. First, you need to differentiate, use the strengths of the differing cultures that you have in society or in an organization. But you also need to homogenize, learn, share, incorporate, bring together. You need to individuate. You need everybody to really fully use their gifts and work as a person who's bringing their expertise. But you also need to integrate, feed each other, break bread, modulate your behavior to work as a whole, create a compelling systems mission. Anybody who is trying to start a DAO or just run a Discord server needs to look at this. And interestingly, what we end up with is from both Oshry and Beer. I'm just going to skip. Sorry. No, I'm not going to go straight to that. So can you see that there's a pattern emerging here? At the whole system level, we need to differentiate and homogenize. And at the level of parts of the system, we need to individuate and integrate. And Barry talks about this being a love dynamic, this being a we are special, we work together, we love each other, we're part of a thing dynamic. And this being a power dynamic. We're out there, we're doing things, we're driving, we're changing, and so on. And his point is that organizations, and if you're familiar with the cultural values framework that has 4 different types of cultures for organizations, this looks a bit like that, but this is not saying choose one of these dimensions. Competing values framework. Thank you, Sojan. But the point is you need to maintain a zestful, active balance of all 4 of these things. And I can do a diagnostic. I can go into an organization and I can say, what practices do you have that support each of these 4 things? And you can predict the future of the organization incredibly effectively from that. If you've got all kinds of power dynamics, then either you're going to have an explosion and everybody's going to go off and start their own business and they're going to split up and it's going to be a different dynamic. You could do this in a band. You could do this for your average 4-piece rock and roll band and see what the future is. Or if you've got too much power dynamics, there's going to be a swing back to centralization and control and homogenization. And similarly, if you've got too much, the Wu-Tang Clan, completely different. They're very interesting collective journey story rather than a hero's journey, and some interesting dynamics there, definitely. So if you've got too much love dynamic, then it gets stale, it gets stable, it gets too stable, unhealthily stable. and it gets broken down, and you're either going to swing back to an explosion of we need to differentiate and people just leave and flee the organization, or it's just going to, you know, rot. It's going to carbonate, you know. And these patterns go together, don't they? So the Barry Oshry patterns and the Stafford beer patterns really connect. The differentiation is the ability to adapt. The homogenization is increasing stability. The individuation is increasing autonomy, and the integration is the same in both. So, you know, got this balance between power and adaptation and love and stability. So that's what we're trying to achieve in organizational life. And I am getting to the end now. I'm sorry I've talked so long, but there's been great comments in the chat. So hopefully you're still with me. So I'm going to talk just about the practices that we use now. And rather embarrassingly, I've got this model of human needs that I don't believe this is fundamental or true, but I just think it's useful. And rather embarrassingly, I went through loads of kind of analysis of core human needs and different perspectives and what people really need in their lives. And I ended up with Tony Robbins' model. I didn't realize I was recreating it, but this is the model that Tony Robbins uses in his workshops and things. The guy with the big teeth who looks like a televangelist who runs the self-help conferences. He's got some really great sides, but he's got some probably quite bad sides as well. Anyway, what we need as humans is a balance of certainty and comfort with uncertainty and variety. A balance of love, connection, and belonging with significance and uniqueness. And can you see some familiar patterns in those balances kind of coming through? And we also need internal growth and external contribution, feeling we're contributing to the world. And those, basically, our need for certainty and comfort matches by and contributes to the organization's need for that stability and homogenization. Our need for uncertainty and variety matches and contributes to the organization's need for differentiation and adaptation. Love, connection, and belonging matches to the integration. Significance and uniqueness matches to autonomy. And if we have these four factors in organizations, then we are going to be generating learning and growth and the contribution to value in the world. So the final thing I want to leave you with, although it'll take me another 5-10 minutes to explain it, is our 5 practices. So in the light of this differentiation across the world and the challenge of retaining those essential balances, and I hope the pathology is clear, that the pathology is that each world is trying to interact with all of the other worlds from its own part of the elephant, acting as though its own part of the elephant is the way of sense making, the way of understanding, or if not the only way, if we recognize that lot over there have a different way of seeing things, our way is superior, our way is more advanced, our way is more, more practical, highly advanced adult development levels, whatever. And the more we try and interact, working from our sense-making world with somebody, with entities, with organizations that are in different sense-making worlds, the more we get into that preserve and protect instead of the robust systems dynamics, the more we're trying to impose our view of the world on other parts of the world, if that makes sense. And that leads to what Gregory Bateson calls schismogenesis, where the difference between our worlds and the way we try to deal with it opens up a bigger difference. And then we try harder and harder to deal with it from our perspective, and then the worlds fall apart and eventually get into conflict or just simply explosion separately. So very practically speaking, for any organization, one of the things that we're quite likely to do is to introduce these 5 core practices. And very straightforwardly, and these are practices in the sense that you need to practice them to get better at them. You won't be very good to start with. In the sense that like say a meditation practice, you need to build it into your routines, into your daily routine, into your way of doing things. And in the sense that it needs to be an ongoing practice, something you keep practicing at. So the first one is honest or productive conversations. And a lot of this is core organizational development. It's from the likes of Chris Argyris. It's from the 5th Discipline Field book, much better in my mind than the 5th Discipline discipline book itself, which I do not like. But this one is honest conversations, honest, productive conversations. Very important that you don't set up a value or a behavior or something that says, in this organization, we are honest, or even in this organization, we have honest conversations, because that creates an incredible double bind that makes it undiscussable when somebody realizes that there's a conversation going on that is not honest. Because not only do they have to break that social barrier of saying, actually, this is not really, we're not really getting down to the realities here. They also have to break the organizational self-belief that says we are honest. So having a practice that says we try to have productive conversations that aim to get at a shared understanding of truth is what we encourage people to do. And we have a set of practices that we get people into where they actually work through having more honest conversations. And a lot of that is about discussing the undiscussable. It's a fantastic book by Bill Noonan that takes you through all kinds of exercises for how to discuss the undiscussable in organizations. And a lot of that is about making two things part of the conversation and visible. The first thing is making emotional content part of the data, part of the conversation. So my reaction, my feeling about what you said, my instinct is to swallow it because we're adults trying to have a rational discussion and we don't talk about emotions, and that's just an emotion. It's not part of the logic, but actually that's important data for us all to surface and understand. And the other part is our reasoning, because we all select from the same pool of data in the real world, but we select that selectively based on our understanding. Then we draw inferences from it, and from the inferences we draw conclusions. Most organizational conversations are arguing from the top of the ladder, from the point of the view of our conclusions. But as soon as we reach conclusions, those conclusions influence the data we select and the interpretations of them. So we can get further and further apart in another example of schismogenesis. So surfacing, making your reasoning part of the conversation is important. The second thing is clarity. Have we got practices that work towards generating clarity of roles, tasks, relationships, what the programs and projects are about, those kind of things? And the third thing is learning. Have we got practices that are generating triple loop learning, that are actually asking, what did we learn about the thing that we did? Could we do that better next time? What did we learn about our framing, our way of understanding the thing that we did? And does that tell us, what did we learn about our identity, about our way of seeing ourselves? If you can build those three things in, all of this generates shared relationships, shared systems, shared meaning. It generates a learning system, but it actually gives you an anchor in uncertainty. It actually gives you a way of, so, you know, these are all self-correcting mechanisms. So if you have these really going full pelt in organizations, then you've got an organization that is actually able to learn and adapt to its context, to its environment, while maintaining inner relationships and clarity. And that's the big goal. So you can anchor into uncertainty in that kind of way. The fourth set of leadership practices is, are we actually managing and leading our organization in a way that generates positive motivation from our people? I haven't got time to go into that in more detail, but I could another time. And the fifth is, are we actually measuring the value we create in the world? So the concept is, those three are the basics. They generate a learning system. If you have active culture shaping, you're generating a productivity system. And these three will have generated a lot of the psychological safety that really supports a positive culture. If you're also focused on a good and clear intent, then you're generating a purposeful system. So the culture practices are also self-correcting, and the intent is also self-correcting, allowing you to recalibrate, allowing you to realign. This is deeply cybernetic, because the whole originating metaphor of cybernetics comes from the Greek kubernetes, the helmsman, the person who's steering a ship, a sailing ship. So you're dealing with trying to get to an actual location, a purpose, a goal, and an intent, but you're dealing with wind and the setting of your sails and waves and currents and tides and storms, and maybe even, you know, managing a crew of people who are doing the rowing to get you there. So just like a sat nav, a very great cybernetic device, constantly adjusts as you go off course, or as there are obstacles in the road ahead. This is about how you can steer an organization in a cybernetic way that adapts to circumstances while understanding intent. When you do these exercises, what happens is you surface a lot of things that should have been discussed a long time ago, and you get an upswelling of kind of conflict and productive conflict if you hold it right in an organization. So we use Patricia Clarkson's priority intervention levels, and the point here is Patricia Clarkson, really interesting group psychotherapist, and more Kleinian, I think, from the kind of 80s. And her point is that you have to address danger if that comes up before you can get to any issues of confusion, before you can get to dealing with conflict, before you can get to development, the deficit, before you can get to development needs. So you need, in order to do this work well in an environment where there's not already high trust and high psychological safety, you do need to coin the facilitator's cliches to kind of create an environment, hold the space, create the context where the safe container where people can have those kind of conversations. So I'm sorry that was quite long. It was longer than I expected, Novi. These are all my contact details. I'll make all the slides available, and I would love to, if nothing else, address some of the comments in the chat.
Yeah, please
and
go ahead.
See how people made sense of what I was saying.
Yeah, please. And also, if you have any additional questions, you know, guys, now is the time to share them.
Yeah.
I know I have one question, maybe related to practice. So if we are talking about systematic change, and let's say I'm an agent within the system, so would you start the systems change from one world, or from like address more?
Yeah, good question. Of course, it all depends on context, Novi. But you know that, so I would do a lot of orienting to context first, and probably definitely try to visit and understand each of the worlds that are relevant. And actually, this is where the book Systems Convening by Bev and Etienne Wenger-Trainer is really good at showing a way of sense making across complex systems and change. But to cut a long story short, if I just go back to the 5 worlds model itself, the most powerful, if I had to do it in a hurry and I had to sort of guess, the most powerful intervention I've ever seen is taking the leaders and the management down to the interface between customer world and service world, and actually getting people to understand the front line and see what the experience is like, and not live in denial about that. You know, there's a lot of confusion here because they're getting these incredible signals of success from service world, but they're also getting these signals of panic and demand for more budget, and it's all too complex, it's all too difficult. And this is what clarifies, you know, this is the thing that takes people to purpose. So that's the most powerful intervention if you have to choose one.
Yes, thank you for that.
That's what startups are so good at for a while. You know, I've had so many startups where, you know, I've bought into a product really early, and I've been in correspondence on Twitter DMs or something with the chief executive, and they're developing new products and they're developing new features, and then they achieve what they call product market fit, and then they don't care about the customers anymore. It's really a fascinating dynamic. Because they're just digging a mine deeper and deeper and deeper into what they think is working. Yeah,
I mean, it's all about bringing value to shareholders, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So any other questions, or Ben, do you want to go through the chat? Or
maybe just quickly from my side.
Yes, please.
My organization has gone through a Deloitte process to say, look at organizational culture. And after 18 months, the results were so distressing to top management that they spent another 6 months or 3 months digesting it before actually then presenting it to us. And now we have a round where top management and the hierarchy comes down to division, then cluster level, and then finance operational unit level. They are talking to us, and one of the amazing comments was that somebody that works at the divisional level would say, you know, we really don't know what's going on at the ground level, which is a frank admission saying, look, I always talk about the ghetto or of building 3. Corporate is housed in building 3. You go one floor and then there's wooden paneling and carpets. You know, so moving to the into the zone, and I walk in with my slops and my shorts and my t-shirt, you know, just to demonstrate that there's other world out there. But it's really, and I don't think Deloitte's adding a lot of value in this whole process, and they get paid a lot to do the survey and analysis. So your framework makes a lot more sense, because the honesty between the people working with each other was clear. So trust between co-workers is high, willing to sort of take one for the team and work harder. But the trust upwards was at about 23-27%. And so my company is one of the top 100 countries in South Africa. And so if this information leaks out, you know, they had to fix it now suddenly, which is bad. You know, this is a slow process. But anyway, just a comment.
No, that's really useful. But I would also make the point that Barry Oshry would make, I think, which is that what you're describing is a systemic condition. You know, of course, the people in the bottom space, in the service space of organisation, support and love and cherish and take one for the team, because they're in a condition of shared vulnerability. And whereas the people in middle management world and in leadership world are in conditions of separating individualized responsibilities. So of course they don't feel like a team and they don't feel dynamic. And when they don't feel like a team and they don't feel supportive of each other, then of course people in service world are going to get more and more piecemeal, conflicting, confusing, threatening kind of things, because they're at the sharp end of the elephant, they're at the pointy spear end, and that's going to, you know, exacerbate the condition of them feeling vulnerable and therefore clubbing together to survive, you know. I'd love to, if anybody, I mean, Ivana, tell me more about your connection there with the Cynefin framework, if you're still here. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I am. It's like, it just reminded me of the Cynefin. I was a participant on a base camp last year, and as I'm working as an agile coach in a very big organization, it was really helpful for me. And I come from natural sciences, which is really something that is, I'm quite familiar with the whole concept of complex adaptive systems. And, you know, it's like in science, in natural sciences, it's so everything is there. So your model also reminds me of that. More or less, it's the same. So how I do it, for example, when I have a project that with the teams that I have to deal with, then I usually position the situation or the problem in one of those, either your quadrants, we can call it like that, or maybe from Cynefin framework, to see where I'm heading. You know, what shall I do? Shall I act, try and make some sort of experiment and then see the response, and then try to amplify if it's positive in the whole organization, or whether it's complex or it's complicated or simple or chaotic. So this is how I do it, like answer some questions that are directing me towards a sort of solution.
So that's great, that's really interesting to hear. And obviously, well, not obviously, but you know, I find great value in helping people to understand and try to distinguish differentiation between complicated and complex. I think I use the words mostly from adaptive leadership, and of course this concept has been around since, I mean, for at least 100 years, probably a lot more. I'm very conflicted about the Cynefin framework in various ways, principally because I worry that it's a bit of a mirror, that you the way so complexity is not inherent in the world unless you've already got a framing in which it's inherent. That's the very, very important fundamental point. Something is only complex if you're framing it in such a way that it meets the complexity criteria. If you framed it in a different way, it would be chaotic or simple or complicated or whatever else. Now, you might be constrained that you can only frame it in such a way that it's complex, fine. But in asking people, is a situation complex, complicated, simple, chaotic, or aphoretic? Actually, what you're asking them is, how do they perceive the situation at the moment? So you're just reinforcing their current sense-making way of understanding the world, and you can try and vary that. You can try and break people out of framing in various ways. I get that, but generally speaking, that is not what happens. And then, of course, there's a question about whether the prescriptions of what to do in each of those domains is actually a good guide to what to do in those domains. But the principal thing is, I think people are mostly getting back a reflection of their current framing of the situation. So it's very rewarding in terms of giving people recognition of what they already think. So I'm conflicted because I do think those things, and I also think that those distinctions are useful, because if you are actually framing something as complex, but you try to deal with it in a programmatic, expert-driven way, then you are going to fail. And a lot of my clients are in those situations. Sandesh, thank you for your comments; they were brilliant. In fact, so many of the comments were brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. Benjamin, quick question, right? I'm looking back at your image that you used to, push the fibers hypothesis, and it looks like, there's an interface between the customer world and the service world. It looks like a direct interface, and then with the service world and with management. But in my experience, both in startups and in bigger organizations, there is no direct interface between service world and customer world, right? It flows through from customer, through leadership, management, and then gets down to service. There's rarely an interaction between service world and customer world, in an interaction based on, getting a feel for what the customer's problems are. It's always filtered through that direction, even though the work is happening by the service world for the customer world, right? But the information flow, the interactions always go through leadership and management. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of things like, public sector, contact centers, customer contact, those kind of things, where so that's where my assumptions about the model come from. But I absolutely recognize the pathology that you're talking about. I've worked in big IT managed services firms as well, where there's actually a sales team. In one company I worked in, it was even called Big Bids, and they're designing, they're trying to force match the capabilities of the organization to what the customer thinks they want, and do it in a way that is profitable, but also can win the bid. And then that gets thrown to service world to try and make sense of what's inevitably an incoherent and a misunderstood picture, misunderstood both in terms of our capabilities and what we can actually do in what context and what the customer really wants. So things can go horribly wrong that way. Yeah. In viable system model terms, you would still say that that whoever's doing that sales, that engagement, that customer communication is a system one, even if they're also in a high level executive position and also taking system 3, 4, 5 decisions, because it's about the function, not about the role and the status and the hierarchy. So everybody who interacts value with the environment is part of a system one. And you'd probably also say that even if it was badly spec'd, at the end of the day, the service delivery has to come into contact with the customer. But I take your point that it's not at the point of specification. It's at the point of trying to meet a previous a specification that was cooked up in a very different sense-making world. Well, at least that's what I've understood from what you said. Is that right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay.
So I don't know if there are any other questions, or should we wrap it up? We've been over an hour. If you remember any questions or you have any comments, feedback, please write, and I'll try to address them all. And also, it's always useful to hear, like your feedback. So
I'd love to have some feedback as well, and I'm very happy, by the way, Novi, to respond to any questions, follow up with people.
yes,
And anything anybody wants to ask, feel free to contact me directly.
Thank you very much for that. And again, thank you for your time. It's always great to hear your insights. And,
Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks for everyone who joined, and see you, I think, soon in another meetup.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, all.
Bye.
Thanks so much
Bye.
for the opportunity. Have
Bye.
questions.
See ya.
Okay, Vaji. Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye. Bye.